to try to address those concerns. So with that, Mr. Speaker, we're certainly all very hopeful that market conditions will improve in the years to come, that will help the fund bounce back at least a portion. There's hopes that it'll bounce back by 5%, possibly as high as...
Order. The chatter is getting quite loud on this side of the House. And the Honourable Member for Richmond has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I mentioned, it's the hopes that with time the markets may help this pension fund bounce back by 5%, possibly even as high as 10%. We're certainly all hopeful of that, but clearly the government's not in a position, nor is anyone in this House, to be able to predict what the future will bring regarding market conditions. But we can all be hopeful. We're certainly pleased to be able to support the initiative that the workers have asked this House to do, and we certainly stand with them in the hopes that their pension funds will be able to bounce back and that they will be able to continue to enjoy the retirement benefits which they have paid into for so many years. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to this bill being passed into law, and that, again, we can only hope that the conditions will improve for both the retirees and the current workers at the New Page facility. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I now recognize the Honourable Member for Inverness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The most important thing that government could have done for these pensioners was introduce this legislation here that we see before us. And if the amendments I proposed last December were this legislation has virtually the same intent as those amendments that were put forth last December, and if my amendments and the media attention that it gathered have contributed in any way to this piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker, then perhaps there is some hope that when in opposition, we on this side of the House can still effect change in the province. And the changes that are proposed here are going to help the pensioners because if they were forced to wrap up that pension right now, and according to the existing legislation, be forced to put their pension into an annuity at some of the lowest rates that we've seen, interest rates we've seen in the past 100 years, Mr. Speaker, they would be hurt by that. And I think especially if the people who are on survivor pensions, getting 60% of the pension that their spouse had gotten, and I particularly think about them, their pension is not only down 30–40%, but that's 30–40% of the 60% amount. So they may be in effect down to 40% of the original pension and trying to live on that. And I thought if they had to convert their pension money into an annuity, the real risk to them would be that they wouldn't have enough money to live on. And we can talk about market risk, whether the markets go up and down, but we also must remember that risk. And this bill gives those people hope that in time the markets will recover and that they can maintain investments similar to what they have now inside the plan with the hope, because if those investments do have a chance to rise, and we know that that is a possibility, Mr. Speaker. So we will be supporting this legislation, and I also want to point out for active members of the plan that the changes will not have any negative impact on them. This would be people who are actively working or up until the hot idle were actively working at New Page. For them, they can opt out of the wind-up, and they can take the commuted value of their pension and have complete control of that. So I think this is a win-win all around, Mr. Speaker. And because of that, we feel comfortable supporting this legislation, and I would like to thank the government for bringing it forward because this is going to make a real difference for the people living in the Strait area and in the constituency I represent of Inverness. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. If I recognize the Minister, it will be to close debate. The question has been called. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The motion is carried.
Bill number 86, entitled an Act to Provide Protection for the New Page Port Hawkesbury Pension Plans.
Order the bill do pass, or the retitle be as read by the clerk. Order the bill be engrossed. The Honourable, the Government House Bill.
Thank you,
Leader.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you please call Bill 87, Good Forestry Management on Crown Land Act?
Bill number 87, Good Forestry Management on Crown Land Act. The Honourable, the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do now move third reading of Bill 87, Good Forestry Management on Crown Land Act.
The Honourable, the Member for Richmond.
Thank you very much, Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise to make a few comments on Bill number 87, which, again, the title, as I mentioned on second reading, Good Forestry Management on Crown Land Act, I find a bit ironic because while I questioned the fact that both NewPage and Stora before it had received certifications for their forestry practices, we had the Ecology Action Centre come before us at Law Amendments say that the bill actually does absolutely nothing to ensure good forestry practices. So again, this government, since coming into office, has been clever with the play on words they have put for bills. In fact, the previous bill regarding the NewPage pension talks about an act to protect the NewPage pensions. Now, when we use the word protect, one can only hope it's actually going to do that, but we all realize there is a risk that the funds in the pension plan could actually do worse than what they are now. So when one reads that, one would think the government's doing something that's going to make sure they're okay and that those funds are going to bounce back, which is completely out of the control of this legislature. Speaker, I just wanted to say, as the Member for Richmond, that we're all anticipating when all the final agreements are in place so that the Stern Group is able to finalize their sale and purchase of the former NewPage mill in Point Tupper. One of the main elements to that is a new agreement with the province regarding access to Crown land. This bill is repealing the previous Stora Act. In fact, when it first came to the legislature, I believe it was called the Nova Scotia Forest Industries Act, which was actually the first company to start up the mill in Point Tupper. So we're repealing that legislation to bring in this new system of licenses over Crown land. Speaker, I've mentioned to the Minister before, and I'll say it again, that we certainly are hopeful that the discussions going with the Stern Group are proceeding and that they can be wrapped up in the very near future because the EI, employment insurance benefits for the workers, has run out for the most part. We want to be able to maintain that workforce for the new operators.
Order, please. Again, the chatter is getting quite high when the member for Richmond is speaking. I don't know if that's an indication or not, but the member from Richmond has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And clearly, this is an essential element of the sale agreement between the Stern Group. So I would hope that the Minister of Natural Resources is working very diligently with his staff to be able to put these new licenses in place to ensure that this facility can get up and running as soon as possible. So we'll certainly be watching to see how this legislation is going to affect those who rely upon Crown lands for their operations, whether it be a pulp mill, whether it be sawmills or other enterprises. But certainly we'll be supporting Bill number 87. And again, I am certainly hopeful that we're going to hear the Minister of Natural Resources announce that an agreement has been reached with the Stern Group in the very near future so we can get that mill up and running and get those men and women back to work. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Now recognize the honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to stand in my place for just a couple of seconds to speak in support of the bill that the government has put forward. And one of the reasons I support the bill is because of fine wood flooring in the constituency of Victoria the Lakes and the community of Middle River has over the years been able to, through the good graces of NewPage, access some hardwood on Crown land. But there was a concern by the owners of fine wood at the time that if the ownership of the mill or the transfer of the Crown land went to another company, that they could end up losing their access to to the hardwood product that would exist on the Crown land. So I think what this bill does is ensure that companies like Fine Wood Flooring will have the ability to have a license to get their wood on Crown land, because a lot of their wood, in order for them to put out the wonderful product that they do, has to be imported. Some of it actually comes from New Brunswick in order for them to make their hardwood flooring. So this provides an opportunity, Mr. Speaker, for places like Fine Wood Flooring to be able to access material for their business on Crown land rather than have to import it through the province. So for that reason alone, Mr. Speaker, we will be supporting this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. The Honourable, the member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I just very briefly, both the previous speakers have talked about the importance of this bill as it relates to New Page, but I think it's important to also recognize the bill actually isn't specifically about New Page, but actually addresses how Crown Forest lands would be managed on a province-wide basis, whether those are in Yarmouth or in Cape Breton or Cumberland County. It doesn't make much difference. I think there's some important changes in here, and I just want to reflect the fact that what we heard from the minister sounded very good the other day, and I'm certainly supportive of what he said in terms of this act. As with many of the bills that have come forward, the devil's in the details, because a lot of it's set out in regulation. And so, we'll be looking forward to see how the government, what regulations the government produces around this. Specifically, we're still waiting on a number of the definitions. Mr. Speaker, as you know, we're waiting on a number of the definitions for things like clear cutting and whole tree harvesting and all those sorts of things. Which factor very much into this, how these regulations will play out in the forestry sector and what impact they would have on Crown land. The other thing that I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention is that we'd hope that some of these agreements protect access to diversified forest management and use, so that one of the challenges that some of the hardwood users had was some of the leases were so big and so restrictive that they couldn't get in and get the hardwoods out for higher value uses before everything was removed for pulpwood purposes. And I would like to see the minister try and address that in some of these leases, because I think there's the opportunity for a very good relationship between different users of the forest products, so that we can have those companies that need to access pulpwood can get that without taking away the opportunity for hardwood users to go in and get those higher value hardwood logs out and see that we have the highest value possible out of those forests. That's really important, because otherwise we won't have changed anything from what we had in the previous agreements. We'll just be doing the same old thing under a different act. And I think there are opportunities here. I've crisscrossed the province a number of times over the past year, meeting with people that work in the woods, a lot of people that try and get timber from Crown lands, and I've met with a lot of hardwood users who just can't get the supply and would like to be able to get into those forests and say, listen, we know you're going in to get pulpwood, let us go in and pull out those larger hardwood logs first, so that we can make whether it's flooring, they can make guitars, they can make furniture. There's a whole range of products that are very, very high value and have a higher value per foot of tree length than the pulpwood would. And so I think that is something that is important, and I hope that the minister and the government will address that, because if we haven't addressed that, then we haven't diversified the forest economy in Nova Scotia, and we haven't changed anything. We haven't allowed these rural communities in particular to diversify the use of the forest and better protect itself against the big collapses that we've seen with both New Page and Bowater. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The question has been called. The question before the House is for second reading of Bill number 87, third reading, I'm sorry. I'm just back in time a little bit. The question before the House is for third reading of Bill number 87, Good Forestry Management on Crown Land Act. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried.
Bill number 87, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 114 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Crown Lands Act, to enable good forestry management on Crown land.
Order the bill do pass. Order that the title be as read by the clerk. Order that the bill be engrossed. The Honourable, the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you please call Bill number 88, the Maritime Link Act?
Bill number 88, the Maritime Link Act. The Honourable, the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I now call third reading of Bill number 88, the Maritime Link Act.
The Honourable, the Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think that it's very important that the government has brought forward a bill that would ensure that the maritime link is reviewed, and moreover that addresses a hole that was in the previous ability of government, as outlined by the Deputy Minister, who said that there was no way that they could have actually reviewed the components that were outside of the geographical jurisdiction of Nova Scotia. So I think that's important, and I certainly thank the government for listening to the calls for that from various sources that said that had to happen. So I'm glad they did that. I think that, we'll certainly support the bill as imperfect as it is. And when I say imperfect, the one thing that I think is missing in this is the fact that we are left with a hastily crafted bill that designs everything in regulation and says, well, it's basically a bill that says that this allows the Cabinet to go and create regulations to do this. It would have been, I think, better for the public at this stage in the game to have seen a complete list in the legislation of the issues that the board will cover in the review of the maritime link. There are many issues, and we have to leave it to our belief that Cabinet will ensure that those regulations are appropriate and ensure an appropriate review, and I think we have mixed feelings on that. And so we're going to have to wait and see what those regulations come out. My hope would be that the Minister and the Premier would actually be willing to consult with the opposition parties on what some of the issues that should be covered in that, or at least even if they ultimately don't agree with this, at least if the Minister and the Premier would seek out our feedback in terms of what issues maybe should be covered by those regulations. And we would certainly appreciate that opportunity, and we hope that the Minister and Premier would do so. I think that, there's been a lot of talk about whether this particular piece of legislation stacks the deck, and I'm not sure that this is the piece that does it. Amira had said after the renewable targets went to 40%, which we voted in favor of, Amira had said at the time that if Muskrat Falls doesn't go ahead, they weren't sure whether they would actually be able to meet the 40% target because they didn't know where else they would get the energy. So I think it's because all the eggs are in one basket, it means there probably is only one option anyway. So for those that have suggested in the media and elsewise that the deck is stacked by this legislation, I'm not convinced that this is the piece of legislation that does it. I think it's the target that does, because they've committed to a project which still seems very much in limbo at this point, since the Amira and Nalcor have been unable to reach an agreement, and they're now months overdue on reaching that agreement. And so that I think should be of concern, and I would hope that the government is looking at other options for two reasons. One, other options so that there are other ways to meet those targets. Never hurts to have other options on the table, but also because if we look at the rates that are coming down the chain from Newfoundland, when we look at their review board hearings there, those rates are very, very high. Very, very high. And if they're not mitigated with other options, then we'll have an extremely high rate in the province when there's an opportunity to mitigate that by blending it with cheaper green energy sources. So there are benefits to this project in terms of creating that energy loop, and I think that that's probably one of the greatest benefits. But the silence on the status of the project from government has actually been very concerning. And I think it's been very concerning to a number of Nova Scotians, because we're at the point now where when this project was first announced, the construction date for that project is rapidly approaching, and the longer and longer Amira and Nalcor go without actually signing the final agreement, the longer that construction on the project is potentially delayed. And so there's a cascading effect all the way down the chain for when that project actually happens. And we go another 3 or 4 months without a signed agreement, you got to wonder whether that project is even capable of being completed on time at that point. And the government has not provided any reassurance or any answers. Emera has not provided any answers or reassurance, and Nalcor has provided the opposite of reassurance on the project. So, Mr. Speaker, I think we come to the end here with a piece of legislation that is better than what we had without the legislation. So it is important to, I think, to move forward with it. We are left with a lot of unanswered questions at the end of this project, and we can only be left to hope that the government will be willing to seek out our feedback in terms of what should be included in the regulations, since they were unwilling to support the amendments that were proposed that may have allowed a third party to do that. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I now recognize the honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and pleased to have an opportunity to this afternoon to rise on Bill number 88 regarding the Maritime Link. And Mr. Speaker, as you know, we put forward a bill in this House and debated it a week or so ago now, Bill number 73, the Capital Projects Act that was put before this House, and it would have added to this bill. This is a good step. It was something that the government obviously saw that was of good use. It was things that we had discussed and proposed in the past, but it still falls far short of what we really need to have in place, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to such bills. This is a large project with really an undisclosed amount of money at this time. That might be the right word, but a large amount of money we know this is going to cost, an unknown amount of money, and we don't know in the end of the day what it will cost. We've been unable to obtain that information. Nobody wants to share that with us, whether it's Nova Scotia Power, Emera, or Premier and his government. Doesn't seem to matter. Maybe even at this point it's just all about going green, and we've said many times in this House before that we believe that green is a good path, and we do need to get there, and but we do need to do it at an affordable price, Mr. Speaker, one that Nova Scotians can afford. This doesn't speak to anything that Nova Scotians can afford. It speaks to spending hundreds of millions of dollars whenever they so desire without any input from the people, Mr. Speaker. And we feel that there's room to improve this bill. We've offered some solutions to it, however, to no avail. We did put an amendment through, as you may recall, Mr. Speaker, to this bill, but it was defeated, unfortunately. Again, it was something that we felt was the right thing to do on behalf of Nova Scotians. And so I wanted to make those couple of points today, and I hope that there'll be room in the future for some potential amendments if they are required and desired. I'm not going to take a lot of time, though, Mr. Speaker, today. I've had a lot to say on this in previous debates, so with those few comments, Mr. Speaker, thank you, and I'll take my seat.
Thank you. Question has been called for third reading of the Maritime Link Act, Bill number 88. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? The motion is carried.
Bill number 88, entitled An Act to Ensure Regulatory Review of the Maritime Link.
Order that the bill do pass. Order that the title be as read by the clerk. Order that the bill be engrossed. The Honourable, the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you please call private local bills for third reading?
Private and local bills for third reading.
Could you please call Bill number 90, the Nova Scotia Provincial Exhibition Commission Act.
Bill number 90, the Nova Scotia Provincial Exhibition Commissions Act. The Honourable, the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I now do call a third reading of Bill number 90, Nova Scotia Provincial Exhibition Commission Act.
Question has been called for third reading of Bill number 90, the Nova Scotia Provincial Exhibition Commissions Act. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? The motion is carried.
Bill number 90, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 69 of the Acts of 1992, the Nova Scotia Provincial Exhibition Commission Act.
Order that the bill do pass. Order that the name be as read by the clerk. Order that the bill be engrossed. The Honourable, the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I was going to move we recess for a while we await the arrival of the Lieutenant Governor, but just in some speaking across the floor, I wonder if it'd be in order of probably the three House leaders. I think we just want to put on record thanking the staff, in particular the pages and everybody, that we make their lives miserable, but they make our lives just the opposite, very workable, and we're very fortunate to have them, Mr. Speaker. And on behalf of the Government Caucus, I want to thank them and for all the work that they do to make this House and your job more efficient, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. The Honourable the House Leader for the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of our leader and the entire caucus for the official opposition, I as well want to take the opportunity to thank all of the staff that make the House of Assembly operate while we are here, from your own staff, Mr. Speaker, both here within the chamber and outside of the chamber, to our chief clerk, our assistant chief clerk, our sergeant at arms, to the commissionaires who are here that work so diligently for us, Mike Laffin, Peter Terrio, who continue to provide direction here in the House, and certainly to our pages, who we would certainly hope that they've had a rich, full experience in their time here in the legislature. I'm sure they have probably seen elements of democracy that the average Nova Scotian will never get to see. In some cases, probably doesn't want to see, but they do so every day in the long hours that we sit with great professionalism, with certainly great discretion, and certainly we want to thank them and certainly wish them well over summer months. For those who won't be returning, we want to thank them and certainly hope that we will be seeing some of the faces again here in the fall. So with that, on behalf of our caucus, we certainly want to express our sincerest thanks. Merci.
The Honourable the House Leader for the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I too want to join in on the thanking of course, all the staff that participates in these sessions of the House of Assembly. So on behalf of our leader and of course our caucus, I want to thank everyone who is here, of course, all the pages that are here, the Sergeant at Arms here, the clerks, and of course clerk staff for all the hours that they put in for us, making us seem that much more smart. I also want to thank, of course, our staffs, because not only do we front the caucuses here in the House of Assembly, but I know a lot of our assistants, our researchers, are on all sides of the House do a tremendous amount of work during the House sessions. I know probably in any caucuses yearly activities that these sittings, of course, the more busy for them. So with that, I again want to thank everyone for their hard work and their diligence during this sitting of the House, and of course wish everybody a great summer. For those of you who are coming back, it'd be great to see you back in the fall. For those of you who are moving on to greener pastures, I guess what you would call it, of course wish you all the very best. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I would also like to add my thanks to all the staff and all of those who make the House of the People work here in the province of Nova Scotia. It is quite an honour for us all to be here, and we appreciate the work that is done by all of those that make this House function the way it does. The Honourable, the Government House Leader.
We shouldn't blame them for the way this place functions someday, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, I know what you meant, and the very kind and generous words. With that, I would ask that we would recess to await the arrival of the Lieutenant Governor at approximately 1:30. So I wish we now recess.
The motion before the House is that we now recess till about 1:30 upon the arrival of His Honour. Is the House in agreement? Agreed. We now stand recessed.
Lieutenant Governor be admitted.
Honourable member, take your places. His Honour, the Lieutenant Governor. It is the wish of His Honour, the Lieutenant Governor, that the ladies and gentlemen be seated.
May it please Your Honour, the General Assembly of the Province has at its present session passed certain bills to which, in the name and on behalf of the General Assembly, I respectfully request Your Honour's assent.
Bill number 1, an act to respect the status of the artist. Bill number 5, an act to amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act. Bill number 9, an act to amend Chapter 3 of the Acts of 1987, the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Resources Accord Implementation Nova Scotia Act. Bill number 11, an act to amend Chapter 318 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Nova Scotia Charting Act. Bill number 13, an act to amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Education Act. Bill number 17, an act respecting certain financial measures. Bill number 20, an act to amend Chapter 379 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Public Trustee Act. Bill number 22, an act respecting the licensing and qualifications of and practice standards for mortgage lenders, mortgage brokerages, mortgage brokers, associate mortgage brokers, and mortgage administrators. Bill number 24, an act to amend Chapter 381 of the Acts of 1989, the Purchasing Management Association of Canada Act. Bill number 30, an act to amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Education Act, to address bullying by promoting respectful and responsible relationships. Bill number 32, an act to amend Chapter 418 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Securities Act. Bill number 34, an act to repeal outdated matrimonial statutes. Bill number 37, an act to amend Chapter 9 of the Acts of 2002, the Interjurisdictional Support Orders Act. Bill number 39, an act to amend Chapter 160 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Maintenance and Custody Act, respecting dependent children and their best interest. Bill number 41, an act to amend Chapter 160 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Maintenance and Custody Act, to affirm grandparents' rights. Bill number 52, an act to amend Chapter 28 of the Acts of 2001, the Conservation Easements Act. Bill number 55, an act respecting community easements. Bill number 57, an act to amend Chapter 17 of the Acts of 2003, the Crosby Memorial Trust Fund Act. Bill number 59, an act to establish the Fish Harvesters Registration and Certification Board. Bill number 61, an act to amend Chapter 25 of the Acts of 1996, the Fisheries and Coastal Resources Act. Bill number 65, an act to amend Chapter 92 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Consumer Protection Act, to ensure fairness in cellular telephone contracts. Bill number 71, an act to amend Chapter 23 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Assessment Act. Bill number 73, an act to amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act. Bill number 74, an act to improve patient safety and health systems accountability. Bill number 76, an act to amend Chapter 41 of the Acts of 2010, the Personal Health Information Act. Bill number 77, an act to amend Chapter 12 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Medical Society Act. Bill number 78, an act respecting the administration of justice. Bill number 79, an act to amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Education Act. Bill number 81, an act to amend Chapter 4 of the Acts of 1994-95, the Gaming Control Act. Bill number 82, an act to amend Chapter 111 of the Acts of 1960, an act to incorporate Nova Scotia Association of Health Organizations. Bill number 83, an act to amend Chapter 107 of the Acts of 1935, an act to incorporate the Annapolis Valley Apple Blossom Festival. Bill number 84, an act respecting the merger of the Nova Scotia Agricultural College with Dalhousie University. Bill number 86, an act to provide protection for the New Page Port Hawkesbury pension plans. Bill number 87, an act to amend Chapter 114 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Crown Lands Act, to enable good forestry management on Crown land. Bill number 88, an act to ensure regulatory review of the Maritime Link. And Bill number 90, an act to amend Chapter 69 of the Acts of 1992, the Nova Scotia Provincial Exhibition Commission Act.
In Her Majesty's name, I assent to these bills.
Your Honour, having been graciously pleased to give your assent to the bills passed during the present session, it becomes my agreeable duty on behalf of Her Majesty's dutiful and loyal subjects, her faithful Commons of Nova Scotia, to present your Honour a bill for the appropriation of supply granted in the present session for the support of the public service and to request your Honour's assent thereto.
An act to provide for defraying certain charges and expenses of the public service of the province.
In Her Majesty's name, I thank her loyal subjects. I accept their benevolence and assent to this bill.
would ask that the members please remain standing and join me in the singing of our national anthem. You may be seated. I recognize the Honourable Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, members of the House of Assembly, I move that this General Assembly be adjourned to meet again at the call of the Speaker.
Thank you. Another one. Before I adjourn, I would like to, just on behalf of the Speaker and the deputies, and I know one of them has had a chance to thank you all, but I would like to thank each and every one of you for your diligent work in the legislature in this sitting. Certainly want to thank all of the pages, the staff, Legislative Council, House Operations, and any of the support staff who, and the library and Hansard and such, for all of their guidance and support and efforts that allowed us to fulfill our duties. On a personal note, I want to thank all of the members for their attempts to address me as Madam Speaker. I believe I have been called every possible combination of titles, and I would note that they've all been appropriate and parliamentary. I do feel a little bit bad for Hansard, though, and I thank them for their patience with that regard. I hope that you all have a very safe, happy, and a productive summer season in your constituencies. And we'll see you all back in this chamber in the fall. We now stand adjourned. Sorry, I guess, yeah, there's a motion on the floor to stand adjourned until the call of the Speaker. House ready for the question? All in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. We stand adjourned until the call of the Speaker.